The silence in the room was not empty, but thick with the weight of expectation. It was the silence of 100 cameras, of a dozen journalists leaning forward, of a nation holding its breath. The air hummed with a tension that ran deeper than the surface politics of the day. This was not a debate. This was a tribunal of values. On one side of the dais sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her posture straight, her expression composed, the quiet force of a woman who had fought her way to this very seat. She began to speak, her voice even, articulate, measured. Her words were a surgeon's scalpel, precise and purposeful, cutting through the rhetoric. And then the voice. It wasn't a question or a clarification. It was a verbal missile launched to obliterate her point before it could even land. A sharp, arrogant tone cutting across her sentence, disrespecting the very foundation of the room's decorum. It was the first time he did it, the first interruption. A jarring, almost theatrical breach of protocol designed to disarm and demean. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Her gaze remained steady, her eyes locked onto the speaker, her mouth still for a half-second before she began her thought again. She was not rattled. She was waiting. Because what the world did not know then, what only a few in that room could feel in their bones, was that this was not a single, isolated act of rudeness. It was the first volley in a relentless assault, the opening note in a symphony of disrespect that would be played out for the entire country. 6 times this man would try to silence her. 6 times he would attempt to erase her dignity with a single word, and each time she would meet his aggression with a stillness that was far more powerful than any loud retort. The stage was set, the antagonist had made his move, and the hero was already ready. The real story was about to begin. The first interruption was just the opening salvo. To understand the full, seismic impact of what was about to unfold, you have to understand the ground upon which this battle was being fought. The stage was set in the hallowed halls of a congressional committee, a place meant for sober inquiry and respectful debate, but which had lately become a televised coliseum for political theater. The topic was a lightning rod, a matter of government oversight and executive accountability, a subject that in our current climate was not a discussion but a declaration of war. Every word spoken here was being microanalyzed, every gesture, every flicker of expression, a data point in the perpetual campaign. In this pressure cooker environment, decorum wasn't just a tradition, it was the last line of defense against chaos. But that line was being eroded daily, chipped away by sound bites and viral clips that prioritized outrage over integrity. For millions of Americans, the image of their government had been reduced to an endless series of public shouting matches, and with each new confrontation, the feeling of dignity under assault grew more profound. When Stephen Miller's voice sliced through the air the first time, it was more than just a rude interruption. It was a signpost of this erosion. It was the physical manifestation of a political style built on the principle that the loudest voice wins. That civility is a weakness to be exploited, that if you don't like the facts, you simply talk over them. But across from him, Jasmine Crockett represented a different approach entirely. She was the counter-narrative, the calm in the storm, a woman who had spent a career navigating hostile environments and rising above a system that was not built for her. Her very presence in that room was a testament to a quiet resilience that her opponent could not comprehend. Her dignity was not a shield, it was a core part of her identity, and it was now being tested in the most public way imaginable. Cameras were rolling, the world was watching, and the clock was ticking toward a confrontation that would not be forgotten. This wasn't just a simple disagreement over policy. This was a battle for the soul of discourse itself, a contest to see if a person could still command respect in a world that had forgotten how to give it. What happens next changes everything, pushing this confrontation beyond a simple debate into a viral moment that would be watched by millions and become a defining lesson in grace under fire. To truly grasp the force of that first interruption, you must understand the man who launched it. He was not a man of compromise, nor a figure who sought common ground. He was a political ideologue, a master of a singular, aggressive art form, provocation. His name, Stephen Miller, had become synonymous with a brand of unapologetic, confrontational politics that had reshaped the national discourse. His public persona wasn't accidental. It was a meticulously constructed edifice of defiance, built upon a history of fiery press conferences and televised clashes that had made him a legend to some, a pariah to others. He thrived in the heat of battle, his sharp words and unblinking gaze a weapon wielded with cold precision. He was a man who understood a fundamental truth about modern media, that outrage is currency, and the surest way to win an argument is to ensure the other side never gets to finish their thought. He had perfected the tactic of the sudden, jarring interjection, not to seek clarification, but to seize control of the narrative and throw his opponent off balance. He saw every microphone as a stage, every opponent as a lesser actor, and every debate as a zero-sum game. His strategy was simple, and it had almost never failed him. He would push, he would prod, he would interrupt until the calmest person lost their composure, until their dignity cracked under the pressure of his relentless assault. He had turned this into a science, a predictable, almost mechanical routine of psychological warfare. And in his eyes, the woman sitting across from him was just another participant in his well-rehearsed play. She was the one who would crack, the one whose poise would eventually shatter. But what he failed to recognize, what his predictable tactics could not account for, was that some people's strength is not found in their ability to fight back, but in their refusal to be provoked. He had spent a career seeking out and destroying emotional responses, but he was completely unprepared for the one thing he couldn't break, the stillness of a mind that had already weathered far greater storms. He was a shark who only understood how to hunt in aggressive waters, completely lost when confronted with the vast, calm ocean of her silence. His aggression was a performance, but her dignity was her very being. He was a force of pure, destructive chaos, and he had just walked into the orbit of a person whose power came from her unbreakable calm. And in this clash of opposing forces, for the first time in his long career, his greatest weapon was about to become his biggest weakness. The man who had built a career on disrupting others was about to be utterly undone by a person who refused to be rattled. And the reason for her composure, her unwavering strength, was a story he could never have imagined. Stephen Miller's style was a predictable formula of aggression, but he had just applied it to a woman whose very existence was an antidote to his brand of chaos. To understand Jasmine Crockett's stillness, you have to understand the journey that forged it. She was not a product of backroom deals or political dynasties. Her story began far from the polished halls of Washington, in places where the struggle for a fair shake was not a policy debate, but a daily reality. She was a public defender, a lawyer who spent her days in the trenches of the American legal system, fighting for those who felt invisible. She saw firsthand how a system could chew up lives and spit them out, not through malice, but through sheer grinding indifference. It was in those courtrooms, standing against the weight of institutional bias, that her resolve was first tested and then hardened. Her composure was not a born trait. It was a skill she had earned through years of being underestimated. When she chose to run for office, she was met with the same kind of condescension. She was told she was too young, too direct, that her lived experience was not the right kind of political currency. But with every door that was shut, she found a window. With every dismissal, she found a deeper conviction. She understood that her voice was not just her own. It was the voice of the millions who had been told their stories didn't matter. Their dignity didn't count. She carried the weight of those experiences with a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but is felt in the steady rhythm of a person who knows exactly who they are and why they are there. Where? Her opponent had built a persona on the art of provocation. Jasmine Crockett had built a career on the practice of poise under pressure. His strength was in creating chaos. Her power was in maintaining calm. He was a battering ram. She was a steel wall. He had been taught that victory belonged to the loudest voice, but she had learned, through years of fighting for justice, that the most powerful voice is often the most composed one. She knew that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford, that when your back is against the wall, clarity of thought and control of emotion are not just virtues, they are weapons. She had faced down prosecutors, confronted systemic injustices, and navigated political landscapes designed to trip her up. Each challenge was a training exercise, each moment of adversity a preparation for the stage she now stood upon. She was not there to fight his fight. She was there to fight her own, the one she had been preparing for her entire life. Her composure was not a sign of weakness, it was a sign that she was operating on a different level entirely. The man who had built a career on making others lose their cool was about to face the one person who could not be rattled. The moment he saw her stillness as a vulnerability, he had already lost everything she had been through. The battles in the courtroom, the fights on the campaign trail, the quiet dignity in the face of so much noise, it had all led her to this moment, to this room, to this man, and to the single defining confrontation that would prove her quiet strength was the most powerful force of all. And he was about to make his second interruption. Stephen Miller, in his calculated predictability, mistook her silence for weakness. He had launched his first verbal missile, and it had failed to disarm its target. He was a shark that had just bitten down on something far harder than it expected. The air in the room, already thick with tension, now thrummed with a new, dangerous energy. He leaned forward, his voice a little louder this time, his tone a shade more aggressive. He cut her off for a second time. The sound of his interruption was like a hammer hitting a bell, a sharp, jarring note meant to resonate with discord. This time, the frustration was no longer just on the margins. Others in the room visibly stiffened. A congresswoman across the aisle shook her head. The gavel, still resting on the table, felt like a loaded weapon. Yet Jasmine Crockett did not break. She simply waited for him to finish, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, her eyes locked onto his, a silent challenge that he was too arrogant to see. And so he went for the third. He was now operating on instinct, doubling down on a tactic that had always served him. His third interruption was a rapid-fire volley of half-truths and accusations, a frantic attempt to regain control of the narrative. But she held her ground. She was a fortress. The fourth interruption followed a beat later, as if he couldn't stand the quiet. The fifth, a brazen cut-off in the middle of a question she had barely begun to form. The room was no longer silent. It was filled with a low murmur of disbelief. Cameras zoomed in on the faces of onlookers, capturing their exasperated expressions. This was a spectacle, an unfolding drama, and everyone knew where it was headed. He was trying to push her to a breaking point, to a moment where she would lose her temper and confirm his narrative of a person out of control. But he was failing. With each attempt to silence her, she only grew stronger in her stillness. The narrative was his to lose, and he was losing it, word by arrogant word. He launched his sixth and final interruption, the most egregious of them all. This wasn't a debate tactic, it was a desperate plea for dominance. He spoke over her, and then over himself, a torrent of words meant to drown out her very presence. The tension in the room was now a physical force, pressing down on everyone, demanding a reaction. The world held its breath. Was this the moment? Would her composure finally crack? She had endured 6 blatant acts of disrespect, 6 attempts to steal her voice, and now the room was waiting for the emotional outburst that had to come. But it didn't. Instead, Jasmine Crockett, still and calm amidst the storm, simply raised her hand. It wasn't a defensive gesture, but a signal of finality. She took a deliberate pause, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He fell silent. The world had waited for his words, but what they would never see coming was the single, powerful line she was about to deliver. The room had fallen completely silent, a breathless void where a moment before only the echoes of a relentless barrage had existed. All eyes were on her. They had watched him try to silence her 5 times, then 6. They had expected fury, a raised voice, an emotional retort. But Jasmine Crockett did not operate in that language. She looked directly at Stephen Miller, and for the first time in the entire exchange, his smug certainty faltered. He had overplayed his hand. He had created a vacuum of silence, and she was about to fill it with a truth so profound it would shatter his entire premise. The world held its breath, and then she spoke. It was not a shout. It was not a whisper. It was a voice perfectly leveled and clear, cutting through the thick air of the hearing room with the precision of a laser. She took the 7 seconds of silence he had unwittingly given her, and with an unwavering gaze, she delivered the line. "That would echo for days. My dignity is not up for public debate, sir. I'm simply here to do the job I was sent to do, which is more than can be said for your performance." The words landed with the weight of a physical blow. The cameras, which had been fixated on the 2 figures, captured it all. They caught the instant micro-expression on Stephen Miller's face, the momentary flicker of his eyes, the almost imperceptible parting of his lips, as disbelief replaced his usual arrogance. His smug confidence didn't just crumble, it disintegrated. He had built his entire career on the principle of dominating a room, of winning through sheer force of will. But her single, calm sentence hadn't just defeated his argument, it had exposed the emptiness of his entire strategy. He had spent his time trying to prove his own worth by diminishing hers, and she had just proved that her worth was never on the table to begin with. Her line was a surgical takedown, severing his power by simply refusing to acknowledge its existence. It wasn't about him, it was about her mission. And in that moment, she had reclaimed all the authority he had tried so desperately to seize. His mind, which had only known a single playbook of provocation, was now faced with an unanswerable move. He searched for a retort, a clever comeback, but found nothing. There was nothing to say. Her composure was a testament to her right to be there, to speak, and to be heard. His tactics were designed to elicit a reaction, a moment of weakness. He could exploit, but she had given him none. Instead, she had offered a masterclass in controlled power. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the sound of a reputation collapsing in on itself. The victory was hers, not because she had fought louder, but because she had fought smarter, and the rest of the room felt it too. The murmurs turned into quiet gasps. Faces that had been tight with frustration now relaxed into expressions of shock and awe. The sound of a pen dropping on the desk of a committee member broke the tense quiet, and it was the only sound for a full 15 seconds. This was no longer just a political hearing, it was a defining moral moment. The man who had based his career on the assumption that dignity could be provoked had just had his entire worldview dismantled by a single, quiet line. He had assumed that in a battle of wills the loudest voice would always win, but she had just shown him that the most powerful voice is the one that knows its own worth and refuses to surrender it. The entire world was about to feel the ripple effect. The shockwave was instantaneous. It didn't ripple out from the congressional hearing room. It exploded from the phones in the hands of 1,000 people, from the screens of 1,000,000 laptops, from the televisions in every cafe and office across the country. The internet, a place so often defined by its cynicism and anger, erupted in a chorus of awe and validation. The single clean line she delivered, the one that had left Stephen Miller utterly speechless, was clipped, captioned, and shared with the speed of light. Within minutes, the hashtag "What Her Dignity" was trending. Then came "So Crockett Shuts Him Down," followed by memes that took his stunned, defeated expression and placed it on the face of every arrogant bully who had ever been silenced by truth. The moment was not just viral, it was a cultural catharsis. It was the visual and emotional proof that a person could stand firm against a relentless torrent of disrespect and not just survive, but prevail. It was a digital roar of vindication for every woman, every person of color, every individual who had ever been talked over, interrupted, and told their perspective didn't matter. The ripple effect was immediate and profound. On cable news, anchors who had been covering the hearing live were visibly taken aback. The instant analysis was not about policy, but about character. Political commentators from all sides were forced to address the undeniable fact of what had just happened. An act of pure, distilled dignity had completely overpowered an act of pure, distilled arrogance. On Twitter, other Congress people who had watched silently now began to tweet their praise. Celebrities with massive followings shared the clip, adding their own reflections on the power of composure. The video itself racked up millions of views. In a single hour, it was no longer just a clip, it was a movement. What made it so powerful was that it wasn't a fight, it was a correction. Jasmine Crockett had not descended to his level. She had forced him to look up to hers. She had demonstrated that the most effective way to combat a lie is not to argue with it, but to simply stand in your own truth so brightly that it casts a shadow over the falsehood. The moment resonated with millions who had been looking for a hero, not a celebrity, not a firebrand, but a public servant who could embody the very values of fairness and justice that seemed to be eroding before our eyes. The clip became a symbol, a testament to the idea that a quiet strength could dismantle a loud, belligerent power, and that even in the most toxic of environments, a single person, armed with nothing but their own dignity, could command respect and inspire an entire nation to take note. The aftermath was a validation, a powerful message that the truth still has a voice, and a viral one at that. And the story was not over yet. In the days that followed, as the firestorm of social media praise and viral clips continued to rage, Jasmine Crockett did not bask in the light of personal victory. Instead, she used the moment to reframe the entire event. When she finally spoke to the press, her voice was not triumphant, but reflective. She insisted that the moment was not about her or about the man who had tried to silence her. It was about a much greater principle. She spoke of the sacred nature of discourse, of the right of every American to speak their truth without fear of being shouted down. Her final message was a powerful, inspiring crescendo, a lesson that dignity and truth, when held with unwavering conviction, will always triumph over arrogance and baseless attacks. The truth is, this wasn't just a simple takedown in a congressional hearing. It was a teachable moment for a nation. We had all grown accustomed to the noise, the aggression, the endless, unproductive shouting matches that filled our screens and our lives. We had started to believe that this was just how it was, that politics was a zero-sum game of who could be the most vicious. But in that one moment, in the face of 6 relentless interruptions, Jasmine Crockett proved that there was another way. She demonstrated that composure is not a weakness to be exploited, but a weapon of moral clarity. She showed us that you don't have to raise your voice to be heard, and that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you small is to stand in your full truth and not flinch. The power of her seventh line was not in its cleverness, but in its absolute, unshakable truth. It was a line that said, "My worth is not dependent on your respect, and I will not fight you for it. I am simply here to do the job I was sent to do." That is a lesson that transcends politics. It is a lesson for anyone who has ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or disrespected. It is a reminder that your identity, your history, and your voice are valid, and they are not up for debate. This moment of quiet strength wasn't just a win for one person. It was a win for every American who believes in the principles of fairness, dignity, and justice. It was an inspiring testament to the idea that a single person, armed with nothing but their own integrity, can shift the entire debate and remind a nation of what it is we are supposed to stand for. And so what began as a moment of shocking disrespect became a powerful, defining lesson. It all came down to a simple choice. Stephen Miller, with his 6 relentless interruptions, chose to prioritize aggression and arrogance. Jasmine Crockett, with her 7th line, chose dignity and truth. It was a choice that changed everything, a moment that proved in front of the entire country that you can win a debate, not by being the loudest voice, but by being the most truthful one. This is the kind of story we are here to tell. The one that cuts through the noise, exposes the flaws in power, and shows us the incredible strength of character that still exists in our world. We believe that these moments, whether they happen in a courtroom or a hearing room, are not just news. They are the real drama that shapes our nation. They are the battles for justice and the triumphs of integrity. We believe that by watching these stories, we can all be a part of a movement that values composure over chaos and dignity over disrespect. If you were moved by this story, if you believe in the power of truth to shut down arrogance, and if you want to witness more moments of epic justice, then you've found your home. Subscribe to our channel now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another story of truth triumphing over power. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that dignity always wins, and join our community so together we can continue to explore the real battles that define our time.